It is day 5 of the war in the Middle East, the American war and the Israeli war against Iran. And has now the conflict come to India's door? The answer is a big, emphatic yes. And why I say this is because what has happened in the past 24 hours is truly unsettling. Take a close look at these pictures that have just been released by the Pentagon. They depict an Iranian warship that until a few days ago was a guest of India at the MILAN multinational naval exercise in the Bay of Bengal off the coast of Visakhapatnam. This Iranian ship had departed Indian shores and was headed back to Iran, transiting past Sri Lanka, when it was tracked, hunted down and torpedoed by a US Navy submarine lurking in those waters. The United States has confirmed NDTV's report that it was a US Navy nuclear-powered attack submarine that carried out a torpedo strike on that Iranian warship, a frigate named IRIS Dena, operating in the Indian Ocean and making its way back to Iran. This happened off the coast of Sri Lanka. According to the US defense officials and the Pentagon, the vessel was identified as an Iranian frigate engaged in hostile activity linked to the ongoing conflict. Sri Lankan authorities reported that the ship sank early this morning. Initial reports indicated that approximately 101 personnel are missing and very possibly dead, while the Sri Lankan Navy has rescued 32 survivors so far. The Sri Lankan Navy stated that the incident occurred beyond Sri Lankan territorial waters and that rescue operations were conducted in accordance with international maritime law. US officials have described the strike as a defensive military action consistent with ongoing operations in the region.
While doing search operation, we found people floating on the floating in the water and rescued them. And later on, subsequently, when we inquired them, we found that those people are belonging to the Iranian ship, and we understood that they need prompt medical attention, and we swiftly transferred them to the Karapitiya Teaching Hospital, and right now they are undergoing medical treatment. We could not find the ship, but we found slight oil patch and the floating life raft in that particular area. And also we have found some dead bodies in that particular area, and we suspect these bodies are belonging to the same ship because we found these things in the particular search and rescue area.
An American submarine sunk an Iranian warship that thought it was safe in international waters. Instead, it was sunk by a torpedo. Quiet death. The first sinking of an enemy ship by a torpedo since World War II. Like in that war, back when we were still the War Department, we are fighting to win.
I want you to look very closely at this video once again, and there's a haunting image of the ship right before it has sunk. These are images that have been released by the Department of War, and they are by far the biggest development in this war today, and possibly the biggest development since the opening day of this war. It is an Iranian warship in international waters, hundreds of miles away from the actual theater of war in Iran and the Persian Gulf, sunk in India's backyard just off the coast of Sri Lanka, a ship that until a few days ago was India's guest at a multinational naval exercise event in Visakhapatnam, making its way back home and sunk and destroyed by a US Navy submarine as part of the larger conflict. The video that's been put out has now understandably become an element of global interest, fascination, and horror as to the extent to which the US military is willing to go to completely obliterate Iran. This was not in Iran, this was not in the Persian Gulf, this was off the coast of India, off the coast of Sri Lanka. Welcoming onto the show tonight, I have Michael Patrick Mulroy is former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense of the United States. He joins us live from the United States today. Michael, welcome. Also with me live is Saul Sadka is a security analyst and author, live with us from Israel this evening. Live from Qom in Iran, we have Professor Zamir Abbas. He's a scholar at the Al Mustafa University and also a strategic expert. I want to start with Mr. Mulroy. This development that's been confirmed, Mr. Mulroy, by the Pentagon, by the Secretary of War just a short while ago, of an Iranian warship transiting back, from an exercise in India back to Iran, being sunk by a US Navy submarine in the Indian Ocean. How do you see this? This is a huge development, far away from the actual theater of war, makes this war a whole lot bigger. Your first reading of this?
Good to be with you, my fellow guests, and your audience. I mean, obviously, there's an issue for the United States when it comes to the legality of this war. That's why there's so much talk about this imminent threat. And although the administration's story on the imminent threat keeps changing, that's why they keep talking about it. Because when it comes to the War Powers Act and the ability of the United States president to start a war unilaterally, that's the issue. Specifically to this, going, whether it's legal or not, that's another issue. But this ship itself was likely, as you just mentioned, traveling back to the region to engage in the fight. So from a military's perspective, once the commander-in-chief authorizes military action, then this is a valid target. It's a warship who, when it returned to the Persian Gulf, could then become involved in attacks against U.S. naval presence there. And of course, the big concern is the complete closure of the Straits of Hormuz. So the international legal question is one I think still to be considered. But from the military perspective, once you're at war, then these warships are on notice that they are a target.
Namal Rajapaksa, member of Parliament of Sri Lanka, is also with us. He is son of former President Mahinda Rajapaksa as well. Namal, welcome. This happened off the coast of your country. It is obviously of enormous interest to us here in India because this has happened in the Indian Ocean, not very far from your country and our country as well, but far away from where the real conflict is happening in Iran. A warship transiting international waters and being sunk. Your country's Navy has rescued many of the people in this ship that has been sunk by a US Navy submarine. How do you see this, Namal? Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, indeed, because as you correctly stated earlier, the war is happening miles away, and we can see movements in the Indian Ocean and just 40 nautical miles from the Gulf in Sri Lanka. So, which is a serious concern for Sri Lanka and also Indian Ocean, and I'm sure for India as well, as to national security and how these movements are happening, especially that vessel being a guest of the Indian naval exercise. And at the same time, I think the government of Sri Lanka must answer to the people of Sri Lanka and to the rest of the world whether they were aware of this particular situation or this particular attack on this vessel, or they were kept on dark. If they have been kept on dark, then they have to bring this up with the relevant authorities and especially with the United States. And if not, if they were aware of this kind of movement in the Indian Ocean and also in the Sri Lankan economic zone, or the EZ, we call it, of the international waters, then the government must make sure that they inform this properly to the Sri Lankan people and also, have a proper broader dialogue with the regional partners as well.
Do you think this needs to be taken up with the United States, the fact that it's happened, just off the coast of your country? Yes, in international waters, but like you said, in the EEZ, that has many strategic and security implications, Namal.
Yes, of course. I mean, especially when it comes to the Indian Ocean, because as we all know, Indian Ocean is something that is active at the moment compared to the Gulf region and also the most of the other parts of the world, looking at what's happening in the Gulf region at the moment. So this is something that Sri Lanka has to take very seriously. If the government had a dialogue with the United States and they were aware of this particular action, then they had to make sure why they kept it as a secret from the public and the parliament, and how they got into that agreement. If not, how come such an operation take place in our waters in the Indian Ocean without our knowledge? And this is something I believe the government of India and also the Asian region has to come together and look at and to take this particular incident very seriously.
From a larger perspective, Namal, how do you view this action in relation to the war at large? This is clearly proof that President Trump of the United States, is keeping his word in terms of destroying every element of the Iranian military, no matter where it is, whether it is in Iran, whether it is in the Persian Gulf, or whether it is off the coast of your country.
Well, see, we have seen this before from that part of the world. If you look at Libya and if you look at Iraq and even Afghanistan, the question is what is after? What's going to happen after? If his mandate from his own people in US, it's up to him to make a decision on that. But there are international laws and regulations that must be respected, and each and every country's sovereignty must be respected and protected. And this is about the national security of Indian Ocean and about Sri Lanka, India, Bangladesh, the regional part of the world, Pakistan. So this is something that region has to bring up together, I believe. And if every government come up with their own policies and own statements, but the question is what is going to happen after? What sort of repercussions that countries like us has to face. Because of certain decisions taken by decisions taken by certain superpowers, so-called superpowers in the world. So I think this is what we have been facing for a longer time, and this is what the countries like us suffer most of the time. This is why.
I have seen the concerns that you've raised in your statement and on social media as well, Namal. The question I want to ask you now is, it is an emerging crisis situation. The story is not over because 100 people are understood to be either missing or dead in this submarine attack on that warship. But, your country's Navy has bravely rescued 32 of those sailors, and they are recuperating in hospital in Sri Lanka right now, which means that this becomes a diplomatic issue between Sri Lanka, Iran, and the US as well amidst this entire war. So that becomes even more complicated.
Yes, of course. And Sri Lanka has a history of maintaining an unaligned policy when situations like this. If you recall, in 1971, when Mrs. Bandaranaike was the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, when Bangladesh and Pakistan went to war, we had to face a similar situation. But we have faced it properly, accordingly, according to international laws, with a proper understanding with the regional partners. So, if Sri Lankan government must engage with the regional partners firstly and see what is our next step and what is our way forward, and to make sure that our region, the Indian Ocean, is protected, and along with that, how are we going to face, because there'll be bigger economic challenges that we have to face. There is bigger social crisis might come up with that. And even if you look at what's happening in the Gulf region, it's maybe a war between US, Israel and Iran, but end of the day, the entire Gulf infrastructure is being targeted. The civilians are being targeted. The school children are being targeted. So this is unacceptable. So end of the day, it's the people and the public who are going to suffer. And he might have, President Trump, with all due respect to him, he might have got a mandate from his own people in the United States, but actual victims are going to be the people who lives in the Gulf and South Asia.
Yeah. No, those are very important points you've raised, Namal. I request you to stay on with me because I have a panel where we've got, representatives from the United States, Israel, as well as Iran. And I just want to make it clear also that this ship that has been sunk by a US Navy submarine was in India until a few days ago. It was part of a multinational naval congregation called MILAN, which coincided with the International Fleet Review. This ship had spent some days here in India, in Visakhapatnam, and was on its way back, in fact, when it was torpedoed and sunk early this morning off the coast of Sri Lanka. This has already become a political issue here in India because the Indian government and the Indian Navy have said nothing so far about this, despite the fact that this ship was literally your guest until a few days ago, and this has happened in your backyard in the Indian Ocean, and not a word has come out from the Indian government or the Indian Navy, which is a little tricky at this point of time. But I'll get into that a little bit later. I want to bring in Professor Zamir Abbas in on this development for a first word on this. Professor Abbas, Iranian ship making its way back home, torpedoed and sunk in the Indian Ocean, hundreds of miles away from Iran, wasn't escorted. deemed to be a threat and in line with Trump saying he's going to sink every Iranian ship?
Thank you very much for having me on the show. This is in line with the American policy of imperialism and colonialism and thinking they are the masters of the world and they can decide whatever they want to do with no respect to international law, no respect to sovereignty of any nation. When Trump was asked once by which law in one of the interviews, he said, by my law, I am the law. So we are dealing with people who think they are the masters of the world, and this imperialist and the colonialist mindset is what is the reality of America. And after this Epstein gang, which is right now surfacing all over the world, and they have been exposed, this war has many links. And one of the major links is the Epstein issue. So Iran is facing people or country or such gangs who are there, who have no respect to any international law, and they think they are the international law. I, being an Indian who live and study in Iran, I am deeply hurt when I see that my sovereign nation or our sovereignty is attacked in this way by a foreign power. And as my colleague and my respected friend from Sri Lanka clearly said, if the government was informed, why were the people not informed?
Okay, the legal aspect, I want to take that question to Michael Mulroy, in fact. Michael, the legal aspect of it will become a talking point. Do you see that mattering in the conversation, in view of the larger mission that Trump is on right now? Because this did happen in India's backyard. There will be conversations that will need to be had in this. Or do you think that's not going to happen in the heat of conflict?
So certainly internally in the United States, this is going to be a legal issue because there is discussions about Congress bringing up a War Powers resolution under the War Powers Act. They have the authority to stop this. They can cut off funding for all operations against Iran. They can let this go 60 days and then not authorize it to continue. They can actually pass a resolution that says it has to stop specifically, so not just cut the funding. That's all allowed under the War Powers Resolution. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, no president has agreed with the constitutionality of that law. So it'll have to go to the Supreme Court because it's clear that President Trump is not going to stop just because Congress tells him to. But this is very much a legal issue in the United States. The imminent threat, that's why I brought it up in the beginning. At first, it was that Iran could build a ICBM. The intelligence community came out and said that's not going to happen for almost 10 years. So obviously not imminent. Then it was that Iran was going to attack us first. The intelligence community briefed Congress, according to media reports, said that wasn't the case. Then it was because Israel was going to strike Iran that we had to preemptively strike Iran because we were concerned they would strike us. That's what the Secretary of State said. And then the president said that wasn't true. So there's a very mixed, confused message that matters beyond just politics because there's legality when it comes to the president unilaterally deciding to use military force against any country, regardless of where it is, whether it's international waters or in the country itself. But the question is whether Congress is going to be willing to challenge the president on this or not. And that's a question that we'll have to see.
That's an important perspective. Saul Sadka, if I could bring you in on this, how are you seeing this attack in the Indian Ocean of an Iranian warship being sunk? This comes at a time on day 5, Saul, when the tempo of operations in Iran, the real theater of war, has also increased dramatically.
Absolutely. We saw yesterday that the vast majority of the Iranian Navy was sunk to the bottom of the sea. There are remaining a number of ships within the Arabian Gulf, and this ship was out there on the operations in India. But that has now gone away. My guess is the reason the Americans did this so close to Sri Lanka's territorial waters and within its exclusive economic zone is perhaps to have mercy on the lives of the soldiers to allow them to be easily rescued. I would assume that would be why. As regards what your previous speaker said, I would just say it's quite absurd to listen to people talk about the morality and the legality of war when defending a regime who 6 weeks ago shot 35,000 protesters to death in the streets. So no one should be taking any lectures on morality or legality from people who defend that kind of regime.
All right, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining me on this. This is a shape-shifting story that is escalating with each passing hour. There are new chapters being added to both the conflict, the combat, and how the world is perceiving what's going on. Nobody was prepared for a ship being sunk in India's backyard early this morning, but here we are discussing it on prime time here on NDTV. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with me here tonight.